For more than 4 years, the war in Ukraine has been grinding on with no clear end in sight, and what began as a war of maneuver has long since turned into a brutal war of attrition, and every single day along the front line in Ukraine consumes enormous amounts of ammunition, equipment, vehicles, soldiers and of course weapons. And to be clear, in a conflict like this, victories are not decided only by the bravery of the soldiers on the battlefield, they are decided by something more or less visible but just as important. We talk about industrial capacity. Because in a war of attrition, the side that can keep its army supplied for the longest time holds the decisive advantage. And at the first glance it seems that this may favor the Russian Federation, because the Russian army is from the biggest country on earth and the Russian stockpiles of Soviet-era ammunition and weapons seemed endless. So for years Russia relied heavily on these depots to sustain the war effort, and Ukraine on the other hand appeared to be in a much weaker position, because before the year 2022 the country of Ukraine had only a limited modern arms industry, and much of the Soviet-era defense sector had either collapsed or was struggling long before the full-scale invasion began. But over the past 4 years something remarkable has happened inside Ukraine. Because despite being under constant attack, Ukraine has managed to build a modern and increasingly powerful defense industry almost from scratch. Ukrainian factories have expanded, new weapons have been designed and production lines have scaled up at an astonishing speed. And today Ukraine is not only capable of supplying many of its own weapons, it is rapidly becoming one of the most important arms producers in the whole continent of Europe. And in some areas, Ukrainian systems are now among the most innovative and battlefield tested in the whole world. So in this video we'll take a closer look at the remarkable rise of Ukraine's wartime arms industry, which progress exactly has Kyiv made in recent years, which systems are being produced in large numbers, and what role is Europe beginning to play in this growing defense ecosystems. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Hi, my name is Alexander Korton. I'm a strategic analyst and media manager from Austria, and I'm also the founder of the German YouTube channel Geopol, and today we want to talk about the arms industry inside Ukraine. And when most people think about Ukraine's defense industry today, they immediately think about drones. And that association is not entirely wrong, because Ukraine has become one of the most advanced drone producers anywhere in the world, and Ukrainian companies and military units have developed an entire ecosystem of unmanned system forces designed for different missions across the battlefield. So FPV drones, for example, have become one of the most lethal tools in the war, and every month thousands of Russian soldiers and large amount of equipment are destroyed by these small inexpensive attack drones. At the same time, long-range strike drones now fly hundreds of kilometers into the Russian Federation's territory, targeting military bases, fuel depots and strategic critical infrastructure. And to sum things up, at sea, Ukrainian naval drones have fundamentally changed the balance in the Black Sea, and these drones have repeatedly attacked Russian ships and forced Moscow's navy to pull much of its fleet away from Crimea. And the Ukrainian innovation in drone warfare is now attracting international attention as well. Because according to many reports, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently revealed that Kyiv had even sent interceptor drones and trained operators to Jordan in order to help defend American military bases in the region. So, in other words, Ukrainian expertise in this field has become so advanced that even some of the world's most powerful militaries, for example the United States of America, are now interested in Ukrainian technology. But it would be a mistake to reduce Ukraine's defense industry to drones alone, because Kyiv has also achieved something equally impressive in the production of heavy weapon systems. And nowhere near is this more visible than in artillery, because artillery has long been known as the king of the battle, and throughout much of the war it has been responsible for the majority of casualties on both sides. And while drones in the last few years are playing an increasingly important role today, artillery remains one of the most decisive tools on the battlefield. And exactly here, Ukraine has managed to achieve a remarkable industrial breakthrough. And the center of this development is a weapon system called the Bohdana howitzer, because the 2S-22 Bohdana is a modern self-propelled artillery system mounted on a wheeled truck chassis. It uses NATO standard 155mm ammunition and is capable of firing shells at ranges exceeding 40 kilometers. And the development of this system began only in the year 2016, and the first real Bohdana was produced in 2022. But while the war in Ukraine was ramping up, the production accelerated as well. And once the system entered its service in 2022, Ukraine rapidly expanded its production rate. And according to information cited by Forbes, Ukrainian defense industry representatives have stated that the country is now capable of producing around 40 Bohdana howitzers per month. So to put it into other words, Ukraine, a country fighting for its survival, has managed to become one of the largest producers of artillery systems in the world. And this rapid increase in production has had a direct effect on the battlefield as well, because earlier in the year Ukrainian artillery suffered heavy losses due to Russian counter-battery fire and Russian drone attacks. But thanks to the growing production line inside Ukraine, Kyiv has increasingly been able to not only replace the lost system, but also to expand the numbers of systems inside the armed forces. And in a war of attrition, that is an enormous strategic advantage. But Ukraine's defense industry has another challenge to deal with, because factories inside the country are constantly threatened by Russian airstrikes and drone attacks. So any major production facility could potentially become a target for the Russian Federation, and we already saw that about the production line for the Flamingo missile. But to address the risk, Ukraine and its partners have begun moving parts of the defense industry abroad. And several Ukrainian weapons programs are now being developed or produced in cooperation with other European countries, making them far less vulnerable to Russian air attacks. And also the Bohdana artillery system is a good example of this trend, because a joint Polish-Ukrainian company has been created to manufacture the system in Poland. The project involves the Polish firm Wadowice and the Ukrainian Kramatorsk heavy machine tool building plant. The goal of this joint venture is to establish a production line for the Ukrainian Bohdana outside Ukraine borders. And this deal offers several advantages for Europe and for Ukraine as well. Because first, it protects production from Russian airstrikes, and second, it allows Ukraine to integrate more closely with European defense supply chains, and third, it opens up the door for exporting the system internationally. Something that is currently much more complicated when weapons are produced inside Ukrainian territory. But artillery is only one part of a much broader transformation right now. Because as we can see, Ukraine is also cooperating with European partners on other types of weapons production. In Germany, for example, Ukrainian attack and reconnaissance drones are being produced in cooperation with local industry. And in Denmark, facilities are being developed to produce components and, for example, fuel for Ukrainian missile systems such as the Flamingo cruise missile. And all taken together, these projects are slowly creating a trans-European network around Ukraine's defense sector. And that development could have enormous consequences not only for the current war in Ukraine itself, but also for Europe's future and security architecture. Because Ukraine is no longer just a country receiving weapons, the state of Ukraine is increasingly becoming a country that produces them at scale, at relatively low cost and under real battlefield conditions. And this brings us to a fascinating strategic shift. Because for much of the war, the narrative has been that Ukraine depends on Western support, and this is true of course, but the relationship is gradually becoming more mutual. Because as we can see, European countries are currently embarking on a massive rearmament effort, and governments across the continents are increasing defense budgets and trying to rebuild their military capabilities after decades of underinvestment. And yet, many of European weapon systems share a common problem, because most of the European weapons are extremely sophisticated, but also extremely expensive and slow to produce. And what we learned in Ukraine: in a large-scale war, this creates a dangerous imbalance, because highly advanced gold-plated systems may look impressive, but if only a few dozen units exist, their strategic value in a war of attrition can be very limited. So the war in Ukraine has demonstrated a harsh reality of modern warfare. And this is: quantity has a quality of its own. And as we can see, Ukrainian weapon systems are increasingly designed with exactly that principle in mind. Because Ukrainian weapon systems are relatively cheap, easy to produce in large numbers, and constantly adapted based on real combat experience. And this rapid innovation cycle has made Ukrainian technology extremely attractive to foreign militaries. So interest in Ukrainian drones, artillery systems and other technologies is growing around the world. And to be clear, for Kyiv this interest could become a crucial pillar of the country's future. Because Ukrainian defense exports could eventually generate billions of dollars in revenue, and perhaps even more importantly, they would deepen Ukraine's strategic integration with the rest of the European continent. Because at the moment European armies begin relying on Ukrainian weapons, Ukraine's security becomes directly tied to the security of its partners. And so supporting Ukraine would no longer be just a matter of political solidarity, it would also become a matter of strategic self-interest. But now, of course, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. How important do you think Ukraine's defense industry has become for the outcome of the war and for the Ukrainian future? Let me know in the comments, I will enjoy reading them. Otherwise, if you found this video helpful and informative, please do make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel Geopol Global. Otherwise, I will end the video here. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one.